think I'm good. Okay.
Testing, testing. Hello, can people hear me? Wonderful. Okay. I'm just going through the setup now for this webinar, and I'm going to commence very shortly. I'll be muting everyone's phones online, hopefully, so that we don't get any feedback during today's webinar presentation. My name is Terry Haines. I'm the Director of the Allied Health Research Unit at Monash Health and Monash University. The Director of the Allied Health Research Unit, I should say, sorry. And I'll be leading today's webinar. Today's webinar will be focused on the Resource Allocation Decision Tool and will be a walkthrough of how to use this tool. If I can just do a volume check, is everyone able to hear me well? Wonderful, thank you very much. And it appears that everyone's getting the hang of using the little chat. So in your little control panel, you should be able to see a little chat bar. So if you have questions, I'll really spend the first 30 to 40 minutes doing a walkthrough of how to use the ReAD-iT. And then at the end of that, I will have a question and answer session where if you can save your question to ask them in the chat, via the chat, I'll read the question out to everyone in the group and provide an answer as best I can. I can't guarantee, of course, perfect answers all the time, but I'll do the best I can. Thank you everyone for making the time to come and join this webinar today. The Resource Allocation Decision Tool was launched at the Victorian Department of Health and Human Services by Kath Phillip just over 2 weeks ago now. And this webinar is a part of an overall training package designed to try and help familiarise people with how to use the ReAD-iT, how to access it, and how to use it to assist them to make their resource allocation decisions. I will make people aware that there are a number of online resources available, videos and also text annotations for a lot of the walkthrough videos and instructional videos that we have built into the Resource Allocation Decision Tool. So please don't see the Resource Allocation Decision Tool as being just a tool. There is a stack of educational resources in there that will help you to understand how to understand research evidence and apply that to your resource allocation decision making. It's also potentially very useful for your staff and junior staff members to understand how to use evidence as a part of their decision making as well. So let's commence. The ReAD-iT website can be found by accessing the Department of Health and Human Services workforce homepage, or you can go directly to it by going www.readit.health.vic, and it's come up for me already. So readit.health.vic.gov.au/version2. So if you put that into your toolbar, you'll get through to the Resource Allocation Decision Tool. What I'm going to do now, just to make it a bit easier for everyone online who's able to see my screen, just confirm if you can see on your screens now for me the ReAD-iT website. So can everyone see the ReAD-iT website on there? Very good. Now it appears we've got someone online has got a microphone that is active. I'll try and shut that down from my end if I can. But if you're able to shut down your own microphones, that would be great. All right, that seems to be better. Okay, so once you've gotten to this web page, there's a brief description of what's involved in using the Resource Allocation Decision Tool. Whoops, close that down. Again, if someone can just close their audio down. Audio options. That's better, much better. Well done. To sign in, you click in this button here, click here to sign in. and then you're taken to a login page. So if you haven't created an account previously, what I'll encourage you to do is to click on the Create an Account button, and that'll just ask you to enter in your name and some details about who you are and a password, so you can choose your own password. Make sure you can remember it. There is a forgotten password button though that you can use. And from the login page, you get into the ReAD-iT. So I'm going to get into the account that I've set up for myself. And this is the dashboard. So this is where you can see all the different reports that you may have created over time. There's a record of them here. What you'll notice also is that some of them are in progress and some of them are complete. Now, for the ones that are in progress, you can go in and edit them, but once a report is complete, all you can do is view the report. So once you click the complete report button, that's it. You can't go back in and modify it. So just make sure you're aware of that when you're completing a report, that once you've done it, that's it. You can delete your reports, of course, as you go along, and eventually I'll go through and clean up my account, because all of these reports are pretty much ones that I've developed during testing of the ReAD-iT. As I scroll down, you'll see a number of hyperlinks underneath, which contains video support. So these are walkthrough videos where I have gone through and done a mock example of how you use the ReAD-iT. There are 3 versions of the ReAD-iT within this website. The first version is for use when you've used when you have an increased budget available to you. Sorry, we've just got some extra noise online. I can ask the wrapping and papers to stop, please. That'd be great. That'd be great. Thank you. So if you want to go through and watch those videos, they're broken into about 15-minute parts. There are also transcripts, written transcripts there that can be accessed to see what's been written for those people who have difficulty with vision. What we're going to do just quickly is start a new report. So let's go to the Start a New Report button. And here you have the first question in the ReAD-iT, asking about which version of the ReAD-iT you're going to end up using. Is it the one where you have a new budget, one where you have a budget that's unchanged, or one where you've had a reduction in your budget? Today we're going to go through the budget that is unchanged. In the previous webinar I ran 2 weeks ago, we went through the one where there was a reduction in the budget. You'll notice that there is a help video here that gives you an introduction to the ReAD-iT, so you can click your button on that and that'll take you through to a YouTube video which describes the ReAD-iT and how to know which circumstance you're in. So today let's click on My Budget is Unchanged and click the Next button. Next, you'll get a bit of a written description as to the types of questions you're going to get in this version of the ReAD-iT. This version of the ReAD-iT, the unchanged budget version of the ReAD-iT, is different to the other 2 versions. In the other 2 versions, the different options that you were considering, the different health services that you were considering spending money on, are considered independently. But in this one, we're thinking about exchanging one service for another. So this version of the ReAD-iT has been set up with head-to-head questions. And you've got one service that is existing or already in place that you are considering commencing, and another one that you are considering, the one that's already in place that you're considering reducing, or ceasing altogether, and another one that you want to commence. So your overall budget is unchanged, but you are transferring resources from one area to another. The first question here is about what the catalyst driving this potential change is. Now, this doesn't affect the overall input into the ReAD-iT itself. It's more of a record-keeping procedure that we have in place so that people who reflect back on this decision further down the track know what actually prompted this decision to be made and what the contextual circumstances surrounding this decision were. Okay. Okay. Next, what I might do is go through to the previous report. I've prepared one of these Model 2 ones earlier. So to go through the example, we have the unchanged budget. We'll go to number 33. And what I'm going to show you here is the ReAD-iT navigation toolbar. Once you've answered about 6 or 7 questions in the ReAD-iT, you'll be able to go to this toolbar for navigation. And what it allows you to do is to go back and forward to all the different questions. Now, the last question I answered with this particular report was question 63, so that's why I'm started off here. But I can go back all the way to question 1, 2, or 3. And what you'll see here is that some of these questions have a tick next to them. Some of them might have a cross. So if I get down to the bottom here, there'll be a couple that have a cross next to them. The cross means I haven't answered them yet. The green means that I have answered them. And the ones that are greyed out indicate that or blacked out, I should say, indicate that I don't need to answer them. The ReAD-iT has a skip flow logic, which means that if you answer a certain question with a particular response, it may not be necessary to answer the subsequent question or one further down the track. So we try to guide you through the questions as quickly as we can so that you don't have to answer ones that are unnecessary. All right, so let's go back to our hypothetical example. Let's go to question 2. So what did I say here in question 2? So in this hypothetical example, the catalyst driving this potential change is that there are demographic changes within our health service boundaries that has seen a considerable population expansion of older adults in the Frailto region of our service. This has seen a rapid increase in local hospital admissions from older adults in the area. So we've got to do something about this. This is what's driving our desire to change how we provide services. I just click on the next button to go to the next response. And what I might also do is just increase the size a little bit so that people don't have any trouble seeing what I've written. What you might not be able to see by me increasing size is the help on the right-hand side of the page. Remember, there's these little boxes on the right-hand side of the page that help explain the question and might give you links to videos that you can watch to help understand the question being asked. So question 3, are there any constraints associated with this potential change? The response that I've put in here is that action plans need to be put in place within the next 6 months before the finalisation of our health service strategic plan. That's important information for some decision makers to be aware of when considering this decision. Is this the right time for my organisational work unit to be pursuing this potential change? I've said yes. We've got that imperative that we've discussed earlier. This question is also useful when we're considering the amount of change that's taken place within a health service. So if your health service has, I guess, symptoms of change fatigue, there's been a lot of change recently, even though you could make a decision now, it might not be the best timing. So this is the question where you would indicate that. But I've said yes, it's a good time to make this change. Question 6. Please record how you identified the option you are considering to cease or reduce and the option you are considering to increase. So in here we have a reason that I've put down, a process that we used. We looked at the potential services that could be used to address the reasons of the hospital presentations, and we also consulted with staff and managed regions. Question 7. It is at this stage we're asked to name the first option. So the first option is the one that's the existing option. So this is a service that we are thinking about reducing or ceasing. And I've said to do that using the MEOP format. The MEOP format is explained on the right-hand side of the page here. M being the magnitude of resources, I being the intervention, O being the outcomes that the intervention is thought to impact upon, and P being the patient population involved. So here we've got $20,000 per annum, which covers 2 full-time staff members, and that is providing chest physiotherapy services to improve sputum clearance, quality of life, and reduce length of stay in patients with COPD presenting to Strongo Hospital. Question 8 is the proposed option that we'd want to commence. So question 8, $100,000 per annum for 2 half-time staff members to provide a community-based falls prevention exercise program to reduce falls and fall-related hospital admissions in the Frauto region. So this is where we're getting all those extra admissions from to our hospital. And so this is where we want to try and reduce those admissions from. Question 9, is changing from the existing service to the proposed service consistent with your organisation's strategic direction? So it's very important with all the decisions that we make that we consider the strategic direction of the organisations that we work for and whether what we're trying to do is consistent with them. So I've said yes, this is what the organisation wants. Now, the next question though is slightly different. It asks about the work unit. Now, the work units involved in this particular decision are multiple. There is a work unit that might be providing the falls prevention service, and then there's another work unit providing the acute service. So I've said no here. This decision, if we take services from one area to another, isn't consistent with the work unit's core business for all the work units involved. So whenever there's a bit of a discrepancy like that, you might be asked to answer an extra question to explain or provide an explanation as to why. So here I've said this potential change covers 2 work units, the Acute Allied Health Department at Strongo Hospital and the Community Health Service in Frauto. The Acute Allied Health Department at Strongo is a core business to provide services to patients such as these who come to the acute setting. However, there is an overriding organisational imperative to try to transition resources from our acute care facilities into preventive services delivered in the community. So this really provides transparency as to the recognition that, yes, there is, with this decision, a difficulty facing that one work unit is going to have to be giving up resources so that another can create a new service. Question 13. Are there any likely adverse resourcing, funding or contractual issues that might arise from this proposed change? So because the resources being used to provide the acute care service come from a central budget, there's no specific activity-based funding related to this service delivery model, so that's not going to adversely affect our funding. However, if we were thinking of reducing a service where there was a payment for the amount of service provided, then that might be a funding issue that you would need to discuss and identify here. Next question. Do the existing and proposed options address the same health and organisational problems? And I've said no, they address different problems. One is about getting patients out of hospital safely and effectively, and another one is about stopping patients coming into hospital because of falls. So I've said no, they're different problems. And because of this, I have to answer a few more questions about trying to identify which problem's the more pressing one. So here we have a description of the first problem, being exacerbations of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. And then the next question will be a description of the second problem, being falls and fall-related injuries. It gets a bit more tricky next because we're going to be asked questions about what we think is a more important issue for our health service and our community. The first question is about the health of your community or the individuals in it. So in our health service, we've probably got this problem of acute exacerbations of COPD, but we've also got a lot of people falling over in one particular region and coming to hospital. Because in our fictitious example, we've got a reducing rate of smoking due to fantastic work by the Quick campaign, what I've said here in this response is that really the problems addressed by the proposed option, being the falls prevention service, are somewhat more concerning for our community's health overall because the number of people coming into the hospital with the acute exacerbation of COPD is decreasing. So I've gone with that option. The next question is quite similar, but instead of from the health of the community perspective, this question is about problems from an operational perspective of the health service. Again, we've got two different types of problems. We've got the problem that sometimes people with COAD or COPD stay in hospital too long or don't have a good discharge planned. But the really pressing problem we've got is this rapid influx of people falling over and having new hospital admissions because of falls. So for this example, I've said problems addressed by the proposed option, the falls prevention service, are much more pressing for our health service. We need to get those numbers of presentations down. Next question, 22. Which option would create more benefit if provided in ideal circumstances? Now, in this example, I've said the proposed option might be somewhat more beneficial. I think that both services can have potential benefit, but in ideal circumstances, if we could provide the acute COPD management service as well as what we possibly could, and also the falls prevention service as well as what we possibly could, I still think the falls service might be somewhat more beneficial in our particular context. How certain are you that this judgment of comparative benefit is correct? So we've just made a statement saying that we think one is more effective than another. And there are videos here on the right-hand side that you can click onto. And I might just quickly go back for a second because I missed highlighting those other videos. When thinking about which interventions are more effective than others, there's a lot of videos here. Each of them goes for about 5 or 6 minutes that you can have a look at to help you decide what is more effective, which is a more effective approach. So I'll quickly just go back. All right. So next, how certain are you that the judgment of comparative benefit is correct? I've said somewhat certain. I've said that some evidence is available, but there's a limited amount and quality of that evidence. And then question 24 has asked me just to list down what some of those important sources of evidence are. So here I've got a reference that I've provided regarding the airway clearance and breathing techniques that's in the Australian and New Zealand guidelines for management of COPD that really indicates that airway clearance should only be done for people where there's evidence of sputum. But our service overall is a service that is being provided to every patient who comes through the door with COPD, whether they've got sputum or not. So that's a bit of an indication that the way we've currently structured that service may not be ideal. For the falls prevention service, I've got here a systematic review that's found that falls prevention exercise programs can reduce falls by 17%, but this can be improved to 42% with a particular type of exercise being used. Next question, 25. Which option would be more beneficial if provided in real life? So this is now taking into account all the problems that might have taken place with trying to provide the existing service in real life, but also the problems that you're anticipating encountering in the with the new service coming up. So for this one, I've said the proposed service is probably much more beneficial. Why have I said this? Well, the next question asked me to record the factors that are currently stopping the existing option from meeting its potential. And what I've said is that about half of the acute COPD patients we currently see don't have sputum. So we're probably wasting our time according to those guidelines. And when we see the patients, if we're not trying to clear their secretions, we're giving them a walk. And that walk can probably be done by someone other than a physiotherapist. It could potentially be done by an allied health assistant. The other factor, of course, as I mentioned before, is that we've got a reducing number of presentations of patients with this condition over the past decade. So there are some factors that change how well this service is actually working in real life compared to what it might be able to do in ideal circumstances. The next question that is asked is about steps that can be taken to address these factors. Now, obviously, we can't force more people with this condition through the front door of the hospital, and we wouldn't necessarily want that to happen. We can potentially reduce the scope of the service to being a referral-only service, if indicated by the presence of sputum and use of an allied health assistant to walk patients instead of the physiotherapist. So that is a potential workaround that we could have to maintain some semblance of a service that is probably more effective than the current model of care. Next question, 28. What are the factors you think may stop the proposed service from meeting its potential, if any? Now, this is a proposed service, so you won't have that real-life experience to draw from when answering this question. But what I've anticipated is that establishing a new service...
Incoming call. Press
Sorry,
the
guys.
pickup button to answer.
Again, we've got a bit of noise online.
Incoming call.
Put a mute the
Press the
microphone.
pickup button.
Thank you very much.
Haines system is locked.
Okay, so we're a bit better now. What I've said here is that we need to do a lot of engagement work with local health professionals and community members to try and attract new staff that attract the patients to the service that will be available for them. So there is a bit of work that would need to be done to really make sure that we're not having all these programs that we're provided with nobody attending. Next, question 29. What steps can be taken to address these factors? And again, I've got a bit of a communication plan starting up and also identified the need to work with HR to identify an appropriate staff member. Question 30. Now this question really asks about the broader context in which this decision is being made. Is there another service that could provide the existing option locally? And I said, possibly. There is another service that could do it, but they're not currently doing it and they don't intend to do so. Now with the existing option, I'm not saying that there's another physiotherapy department here that could do this. What I'm saying is that there are nursing staff and other staff available within the hospital who might be able to perform certain parts of this overall function, such as walking patients. Whether that actually happens or not would need behaviour change and organisational change in procedures and policies locally. Next question, 31. Is there another service that could provide the proposed option locally? So this is about the falls prevention service. And I've said possibly. It's likely that there's going to be private practitioners in the Frailto region. But what they're planning on providing and whether people in this demographic will actually be able to access services at the cost that will be charged or the price that we charge them is a different matter. Often the older people in Strongo are of lower socioeconomic background. So even though there is another service that could potentially do it, there's no real models of care emerging in the private sector to meet this need. So I'm putting that in the possibly section. Question 35. In ideal circumstances, what is your best judgment as to the comparative cost benefit or cost effectiveness of the existing and proposed options in your community and health services? At the moment, I've said that proposed service is probably going to be more cost beneficial. So when making resource allocation decisions, it's not just about whether a service works or not. It's about bang for your buck. And this question really asks you to have a think about what is likely to be giving more benefit in terms of health outcomes and improvements in service delivery for the amount of dollars invested in providing that service. Similar to previous questions about the effectiveness of these options, I'm again asked, how certain are you in the judgment of comparative cost benefit? And I'm only going to say, I'm only somewhat certain. There is some evidence available, but it's of a limited amount and quality. And those sources of evidence, I wasn't able to find any economic evaluations to support the use of our current inpatient physiotherapy service model for people in hospital with COPD, but I was able to find some evidence about cost effectiveness of community-based falls prevention exercise programs. I had a look at look at that evidence, and that paper found that it would cost the program about $28,000, $29,000 per quality adjusted life year gained, which the authors thought was quite reasonable. But they did make this assumption that there'd be 50% uptake of the falls prevention service in the community by eligible people, which might be overly optimistic. So I've just made a few notes there about that. And again, it's probably the reason why I went with only a somewhat confident judgment in the previous question. There are videos there also, hyperlinks you can use to identify where we've gone through and provided information about how to make judgments about cost effectiveness. Question 38. Would changing from the existing service to the proposed service impact on access to other services? This is quite important for when you're considering services that are point of contact or services that lead to a lot of referrals to other services. So if you take away a service that really distributes patients to other services, it might have an impact here. But in this particular instance, no, we don't think we're going to have much of an impact at all. Question 41. Would changing from the existing service to the proposed service impact on the cost for the patient or the consumer? And again, I've said that there's unlikely to be much of a significant impact on cost for the patient or consumer. If I was reducing a falls prevention service in the community and replacing that with a private practitioner service that was substantially more expensive, then I'd probably say yes. That was the sort of context I was talking about there. Question 44 looks at the impact on equitable service delivery. Now, there is a definition of equity on the right-hand side here that has been provided by the Victorian Department of Health and Human Services. Obviously, there is a number of definitions of equity available in the literature. In this particular case, because we're dealing with a vulnerable group of older adults, lower socioeconomic background in the Frauto region who currently don't have any falls prevention services being provided to them, I felt that this would lead to a significant improvement in equitable service delivery. Next question, 47. Could changing from the existing service to the proposed service impact on the reputation of the service or its staff? Sometimes when switching from one service model to another or removing a service or adding a particular service, there can be potential reputational issues for the health service that need to be considered. In this instance, I've said no. No discernible likelihood of, or there's probably a discernible likelihood of enhancement, particularly in the Frauto region, of providing this new service. And we don't think that those in Strongo Hospital would notice too much if we reduced the service or changed the service model that we have. Question 50, on the home straight. Could changing from the existing service to the proposed service impact on interdependent services? And again, this is thinking about those downstream services that these ones might refer to and having to think about, well, what are the likely impacts and do we have to do anything to mitigate these? For this example, I've said it's unlikely to have any impact on interdependent services. Question 53. Could changing from the existing service to the proposed service impact upon the workforce? And yes, I'm saying that there's likely to be members of our workforce that are adversely affected. When I answer these questions and there is a problem that's identified, you get two subsequent questions. So here's the first one to describe the risk. And here I've written that the staff who currently work on the acute roles at Strongo Hospital will likely need to be redeployed. And the following question is a mitigation strategy question. Describe any risk mitigation strategies you would need to put in place to address this risk. So for here, I've said the local manager would need to discuss redeployment options and into other roles that may open up at Strongo Hospital for those staff involved. So that's a consistent pattern with a lot of the questions. Because of the way I've answered them, these risks haven't popped up. But if I answered these questions in a way that, say, for example, there was a big threat to the reputation of the hospital, you'd see these two questions pop up. One to describe the risk and the other to describe the mitigation strategy. And these will auto-populate in a second in our report, a risk mitigation table for us, for the particular version of the ReAD-iT. Question 56. Is changing from the existing service to the proposed service aligned with recommendations and policies from government departments, funding bodies and agencies? And this includes things like the national standards. I've said not clearly aligned, but not contrary either. I could also have potentially picked there are no relevant recommendations or policies from the group specifically. Is changing from the existing service to the proposed service aligned with recommendations from industry and professional bodies? Sometimes professional groups will make clear recommendations about how particular services should be provided, and this is questions about identifying if there are clear recommendations out there and if what we're doing is consistent with them or not. This page is a little bit different now. This is a stakeholder question. The stakeholders in this decision could be many and numerous, or it could be only a small number. It depends on the context. You'll start off with one stakeholder, and you can find out the information that's required in each little box by waving your mouse over the little hyperlink there. So I've done that there. Or to identify if it's a critical stakeholder, I'll wave my mouse over this. I've entered the information here already for one stakeholder. The acute manager at Strongo Hospital is Matthew Delly. The actual versus anticipated question is asking, have you actually had this consultation already, or is this an anticipated consultation with a critical stakeholder that's likely to take place? We thought that with some of the decision-making processes and some of the feedback we received when developing the ReAD-iT was that you wouldn't necessarily want to consult with everyone about the decision straight away. Sometimes you have a more staged process. So this is recognising that. Then you get to write down whether they were supportive or not. They can be strongly supportive, somewhat supportive, neutral, somewhat against, or strongly against. And again, this is your subjective opinion here as to their response. If they're against, then you need to enter in a risk mitigation strategy for this stakeholder group. So it can be an individual stakeholder, or it can be a group that is represented by an individual as well. And also some details of the consultation that took place. So here I've said a face-to-face meeting. You can add stakeholders by just clicking on this button. So if I do that now, another box jumps up and you can enter in the details for the next stakeholder group that's involved in this process. Then question 63, are there any other considerations that are relevant to this decision that haven't already been captured? So this is the speak now or forever hold your peace question to enter in any additional details that haven't already been captured of importance to this decision. So if you say yes, then an open text box will open up and you can write those details in. I'm saying no. And we get to the interim report. So here you see a button at the top that says click here to generate the interim report. I'm going to click that link. And a new report will open in my window. Now, the first thing to notice is that the report is here in the window, but I can also click on this link here to download the report in a Microsoft Word format. So what we anticipate is that people will take this report, this automatically generated report, and modify it to suit their local needs. So if you've got a local template that you need to use to communicate your decisions with your executive or that you want to use, you can just get all the information you've entered in and feed it into your template by using this Word document. However, what we've done in giving you the report here is we've tried to use the common subheadings that most reports across Victorian health systems use to communicate decisions when we got feedback from our expert working party. So let's go through this report. There's just a little preamble at the start, and where you see blue text, that's where you can, in the Word document, add in some information, or where we suggest you add in information, what that information is. We've got the date, then we've got a summary of the background to the decision, then we've got a description of the options being considered. So the first option, again, our text in the MEOP format, it's been automatically populated into this section. And again, you'll notice here that I said $200,000 for the existing option and only $100,000 for the proposed option here. So again, you can enter in text in the Word document to explain why you're considering different amounts of money here. And it may be that maybe we're just thinking of reducing from $200,000 per year investment in existing service down to $100,000. And that's where you get the equal amounts. Now, what we have in the rest of the report is the different domains of decision making that you've answered questions about all grouped together. So the first domain of decision making that was going to be really important, or the first theme area, I should say, is appropriateness. What is the appropriateness of the choice that you're making? And for this theme, there's two domains. There is the internal considerations that related to the strategic direction questions that you answered, and also the external considerations domain, which related to things such as government policies and professional body recommendations as well. So the responses that were provided in this fictitious example had now been automatically populated into this report. The next domain is that of impact and what the impact of the decision would be. And we've again got the domains of the size of the problem, the extent of it, the effectiveness of the options, so how well they work, and all the text I entered in has been automatically populated into this report. Then the cost effectiveness of the option, how the option would also affect access to services, the reputation of the health service, the impact on other interdependent services, the impact on the workforce. And then finally, the last domain, the domain of readiness. So here we have the questions we answered about resourcing and also about stakeholder support. If we'd entered in any other considerations in that last question, that'd be populated in this area here. Now, the most useful thing I think of the ReAD-iT is the decision graph. And this decision graph, what I'm going to do is just change the size of the window because this affects how big the graph looks. That's a bit better. In the Word report, it'll be a standard size, but in your web browser, it will change size depending on the level of magnification you have. Here we have a graphical representation of the questions that were answered. And here I've said, what we have is a lot of green bars. Where you see green bars, you see a lot of results in favour of the proposed option. So you can see down here in the legend, going off to the right, bars that go off to the right that are green, favour the proposed option. Bars that head off to the left, favour the existing option. And for a lot of these questions, we've got a lot of long green bars heading off to the right, which really do favour making the change. If you see an orange bar, what that would indicate is that there is an indeterminate answer, so that it's not quite sure whether it's in favour of the existing option or the proposed option. With this particular model of the ReAD-iT, because getting change in resources is so difficult, where there is no harm in making the change, that will actually usually appear as a small green bar in this output. So this has been developed so that what we can do is identify in a very quick and simple way what the overall decision looks like and whether there's things in favour or not of the decision. One of the issues that's been raised here, though, in this output is the workforce bar. And for this one, we've got a big red bar, which is a bit of a problem. So that was because of the staff that would be affected. And what you'll see next when we go back to the ReAD-iT, what we'll quickly do is select that, yes, we'll go with the proposed option. We will, so that's one that we want to use. And we'll generate a final report. If there are key factors that have influenced you in coming to this decision, so for me, I've been influenced particularly by the need for this service and the strength of the evidence behind providing the falls prevention service. So I type that in there. I'm just going to skip past that quickly though. If there's any assumptions that I've made in coming to this decision, well, the big assumption I'm making is that people in the Frailto region will actually want to use the falls prevention service and that will have good uptake from the people involved, because that was, again, one of the key assumptions in the economic modelling paper I found. So we've answered the questions. We're just going to say that this is a recommendation that we're going to take to our management rather than being a final decision. You can make a final decision if you're the person who's actually making the decision. We're using this document to help lobby up, further up the chain and making recommendations. Now it says, congratulations, you've successfully answered all the questions. Click here to view your final report. So the final report is very similar to the interim report. Again, you can download the final report in the Microsoft Word document format. Here we have a list of, again, similar subheadings that we went through before, but we've added a couple of extra subheadings in, again, based on the reporting templates that health services normally use to make decisions or to report decisions to their executive. So an executive summary, it has the background, it has the recommendations that we're making. You can add that text in. So if I'm making the recommendation, yep, I'm going with the proposed service, the falls prevention service, but I'm not going to completely get rid of the acute service. I'm just going to change who does the walking and change which patients we see, and you'd add that detail in there where the blue text is currently placed. Then we get down to the decision graph with the green bars indicating the areas that there's a lot of support for making these changes. If I'd entered text for those last couple of questions about factors that influence the decision and assumptions, that would have been entered there, that text. Then we have an explanation for each of those bars and why they're green or why they're red based on the responses provided. So there's I guess, a very lay summary of the responses that is being provided. Then I'll just scroll down. Here we have the risk analysis and contingency planning table. So here we had a couple of risks that we identified in the report. And here is the mitigation strategies that we entered in. And again, they've been automatically populated into this table. This is one of the key differences between this model of the ReAD-iT and the other two models where there's an increasing budget or a reduced budget, because there's potentially many options that you could look at with the other two options. Coming up with a mitigation table for every single potential option, we thought would just make the report way too cumbersome and way too big. So what we've decided is that people will be able to enter in their own risks and mitigation strategies from those identified in the Word version of the report for the other two modules, for module where there's an increased budget or a reduced budget. But because for module 2, it's a head-to-head comparison, there's only the one risk mitigation strategy table required. It's a lot simpler for us to put it in there and have it in a concise report. Then we go into an appendix which has all the option descriptions and all the answers that you provided in detail to the questions contained within the ReAD-iT. So at this point, what I'll do is open the chat for any questions that people might have about the ReAD-iT, and I'll do my best to answer them. So if you've got a question, feel free to get onto the chat and just type it in. Normally takes a little while for someone to write the first question. That's okay, it's normal. A question that's come up previously in the previous webinar is what happens to the data which is put into the ReAD-iT? What happens is that there is a storehouse that sits, it's like a big spreadsheet that sits in the background and all the data is in there. There is security measures in place, of course, privacy is a big thing at the moment. That data can only be accessed in de-identified form and requires an ethics committee approval to be able to access and use de-identified data. Questions come in. Terry, can you estimate how long it took you to complete the example you've just shown? Thanks for that question. Yes, so the fictitious example only took me about 20 minutes to run through and write the responses down. But for when you're doing it for real, you need to think about time taken to collect the evidence, to sit down and really think about your responses. I guess it's a lot easier for me to write a fictitious example where it doesn't really matter which stakeholders I created. I've managed to steal one of the Australian basketball players for my stakeholder example. But when you're doing it for real, it might take longer, but a lot of the time is time you're going to need to spend anyway to make a well-considered decision. And that's one of the things that is really driven the process behind developing the ReAD-iT, is we wanted to make sure people had a very clear and systematic process in place that underlined the decision-making processes they used. At the start of this work, we conducted group interviews at the Department of Health, at Casey Hospital, and in Bendigo as well. And we did a bit of a travelling roadshow, and we asked allied health managers about the decisions they had made, how they had gone about making those decisions, and about the things they thought they could have done to make those decisions better. And a lot of the things that they said they could have done to make the decisions better are the things that now appear in the ReAD-iT. So things that have come back to bite them in the bum a bit later on are things that they needed to think about, which is why we've included them in the ReAD-iT. Does anyone have any other questions? Okay. Well, that appears that we have reached the end of today's webinar. If no one has any other questions, thank you very much for your attendance. Again, the ReAD-iT is designed to try and help to make decision-making consistent, to help people to keep a clear account of what is going on with the decision-making that takes place with the resources in our healthcare system. No, there is no cost at all. So we've had a question come in. Is there a cost to using the ReAD-iT? No, there is no cost at all. So the Department of Health and Human Services has funded the development of the ReAD-iT. And again, the entire purpose here is to try and help people to make well-considered decisions that are going to be able to be reported to their peers and to their managers transparently and reproducibly, I guess. So there is no cost. Oh, the address, again, for those who came in a bit late and missed it, it's www.readit.health.vic.gov.au/version2, and that is all you'll need. So if I go back up here and get rid of that part, that's what it, and I'm back to the login page there. Okay, so readit.health.vic.gov.au/version2, the 2 being numeric. Question has come in, is ReAD-iT limited to Vic Health? No, it's a website. People around the world will be able to use it. I will mention this. It was designed to have Google Chrome as a browser. It makes downloading the reports a lot easier. So Google Chrome works well with, and it was also designed for PCs primarily. Now, you will be able to use it and put information in from a Mac. We have identified there are sometimes issues with trying to download your reports if you are not using a PC. So if you're using a Mac, downloading the reports in a Word version, that takes a bit of time and sometimes doesn't work. So for best results, use Google Chrome as your browser and do it from a PC. You can, of course, just click save and come back to filling in the ReAD-iT later on. So you can put a bit of information in and think, oh, okay, I've got to go find out something else now. Go back and you can re-enter that report later on by going to your dashboard and reopening that report. As long as you haven't completed the report, you can go back in and reopen it. I like to leave most of my reports at the interim report stage until I'm absolutely sure I'm going to finalize it and go through to that final report. So if you just download the interim report and don't go all the way through to the final report, you can still go back in and edit your responses. Next question. Can you enter in more than 2 scenarios at a time? Great question. For the head-to-head transfer of resources, no, there's only, so for the ReAD-iT module, where you've got an unchanged budget, the feedback we received from our user testing and from our expert working party was that in that situation, you're usually thinking of starting something and stopping something else. So we framed that as a head-to-head comparison. Now, if in that head-to-head comparison, say in our example, we had $200,000 for a COPD management versus $100,000 for falls prevention, and let's say another $100,000 for a stroke rehab program that I wanted to start up, then you could think about the falls program and the stroke rehab program at the same time. It does make it quite difficult to answer the questions about effectiveness and cost effectiveness, though. So what you're probably better off doing is doing the report twice, once with half the money from the existing service with the falls program, and another time with the other half of the money from the existing service for the stroke rehab program. The other two modules of the ReAD-iT, the ones with the increased budget or the reduced budget, you can consider up to 4 options simultaneously. And with that one, we've found that from our user testing, you probably wouldn't do any more than 4 options anyway. Usually from your initial groundwork, you know what your top 2 or 3 options are, but you can do multiple options with the other ones. So yeah, good question. Thanks for that. Any other questions? Okay, well, if anyone has questions in the future that they want to ask about the ReAD-iT, my name's Terry Haines. I can be contacted at Terrence, spelled TERRENCE.Haines@monash.edu. If you've got questions for the ReAD-iT, you can ask me there. We've had one more question that's come in. Any place for inputting graphs, etc.? Yes, again, so the question is, can you put graphs in and other information? What I'd recommend you do is download the Word version of either the interim or the final report and add the graphs into them. So if you have a randomized trial, for example, where there's a really fantastic graph showing how wonderful the service is that you're trying to commence, then grab that graph and chuck it into the Word document that you can download once you get to the interim and final report. I feel like a bit of an auctioneer. First, second time, third time, final chance for any questions. Again, please do feel free to contact me just at my email address, and I'm very happy to try and answer the questions you might have as best I can. All right, well, thanks very much, guys, for your attention today, and thanks for the time, and good luck with using it. I'm going to cease the webinar now. See you later.